On, where are the recordings available to us also?
Sure,
Uh,
I will be glad to send it out. I think I've got all of them. I haven't edited any of them together to shorten them and all that, but I'll send every one of them that I've got to you guys.
okay, thanks.
Because I know sometimes it's helpful to see I know I find when it comes to somebody doing a demonstration, I find it a lot, it's very helpful for me to see it more than once sometimes.
Me too.
So I'm going to do another demo piece like this.
If you need to re-instruct or talk through what you're doing in an effort to record for
Well,
her, it doesn't bother me. Just
I figured it might not. So what I will do is what I'm going to do is, since I've done this one already, um, I was just sort of doing this one while I was waiting for everybody else to show up. So what I did with this one, of course, was using the flare pan mostly. And then of course, I added um, water and spread it around. And if you'll notice, there's a slight difference in the tone of the grays here versus the grays that are here, and some of the grays up here. I switched to a different kind of pen. I was using a fountain pen that dries a little, this one dries a little more reddish violet or blue violet gray, and this one has a little more, a slight greenish cast to it. So I'm going to switch to a different pen. This is also a fountain pen. It's a disposable fountain pen. I used to use this one a lot when I was um, a college professor. I used it for grading of all things, but I liked having the quick the quick easy kind of fountain pen. But before I do that, I have two of them in my sketch gear, and these are disposable, which I find now to be kind of icky, the idea that they're disposable and you have to throw them away. I found from one of my friends that you can in fact remove the barrel and refill it with ink and then put the barrel back on. This one does appear to be empty because it does have a clear spot in it. But so I'm going to put it away and grab the other one. That's why there was the other one there. So yes, this one's full. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to draw with this ink that I know is water soluble, and have some fun with that a little bit and bring water to the table afterwards. So let's see, I'm going to use the same subject matter and not going to be super careful with my drawing, but I just want to get some basic shapes in, some of the character of these seed pods. They're sort of clustered together here. There's another one underneath. And they're kind of dark, but I'm not going to worry about that yet. I just want to get some basic lines in. Of the stem. So I'm being careful, but I'm not being fastidiously careful about perfection by any stretch, because I know that when I wet these, well, my whole thing just went moving. Trying to get a different angle. one of the nice things about having a water soluble ink that I'm going to be working with, I made a mistake and went way too far to the right on this one. And my ink is water soluble, so I'm going to be able to pull that around to a large extent. In my finished drawing. Okay, so I've got this pen that, much like my Flair pen, is water soluble ink. I'm gonna grab my brush and now play a little bit with moving ink around. The one thing I recommend, as soon as you have a wash or wet ink, wet watery inks, grab your paper towel. Have it at the ready, because if you do something that you don't like, one, you can clean your brush off in a hurry and then use your brush to pull the fluid in a direction you want, or you can actually dab away right immediately with your brush if something really is going bad. Right this minute, I'm just doing a damp brush. The damp brush, I'm not getting quite as much ink run, but I'm going in right away and sort of creating some darks, little small washes, because I'm picking up ink and maneuvering it around. The trick to remember is that even outside of that, you've picked up ink in your brush already, so you can maneuver ink other places. You can pick up ink from one part of the drawing and carry it to another if you need to. You can paint. You can basically do painting / drawing with your ink. You can even let the brush begin to dry out with the ink you've picked up and get some dry brush techniques if you wish. And you're not limited to accepting things exactly as they are. I've got this extra stuff going on up here that I really don't have any need to have. I got a little out of the way, so I can just go in, wet it, and pull most of the ink off. I can go back in and wet it again and pull off the new ink. So it's not gone, but it's a lot smaller and less noticeable. And that's what happens with ink, with any kind of situation, where if you can make it a little less obvious, then in other places you can come back and make something else stronger and make it more, grab more of the attention. Now this is damp paper here, so these ink lines that I'm putting on now might not be crisp in the end, but the paper's dried off some. And so what I'm doing is I'm just playing with the curving lid, if you will, the lip of the spiral that held the cap in place. And I can come back up into here and go right over an ink line. If it's really wet, it will explode. The ink won't jump up off the paper, but it'll jump around on the paper. But here I'm able to come in and add darks. They're essentially a little darker than the ink wash, and sort of reestablish some of the darks I had originally with my pen. Add new ones. And if you do go in with water, you don't have to carry the ink far if you don't want to. You can mash it around and keep it in a dark puddle close to where you want it to be, or you can spread it out like I was doing over here. As I do this, I'm going to come in and I'm going to put some more ink lines, do some shading. You can, this is what we want to talk about at the end of class today anyway, the idea that after we've started mixing wash and line, we do not have to stop either one. We can do one first and the other, or we can do the wash first. We could do the line first. My tendency is to do either one depending on the image, but also I'm not completely tied to doing one. I can always add it as I see fit and continue to make changes right up to the very end, adding ink or wash. And what I mean by ink line. So there I have added darker ink in with line. Now I still have a damp brush. It's not a super wet brush anymore, but I can come back in if I want to and say, okay, I like that dark that's there, but I'm going to bring a little bit of gray further down just by barely picking up any ink. Here I'll do the same, maybe a little bit right here. I don't want to fiddle forever. One of the things that when I'm often when I'm teaching, one of my little rules I give students, as much as I don't believe in absolute rules, when we fiddle too much, what we're oftentimes doing is we're not sure what to do, so we'll fiddle. Well, the rule I'm going to give you actually came from my mother, who was a pretty gifted sweater knitting person. I mean, that was one of the things she learned as a kid, growing up in Ireland and in England, is she learned how to knit. And she would say that if you mess with the knitting too long, you begin to unravel all the nice little knots that at the basis of knitting. So you don't want to mess with the things too much. You don't want to overdo it because you're starting to unravel all the structures that you've created. And you're also usually starting to get too fussy with it. So sometimes just leave something as it is. So there is the use of a fountain pen. It happens to be a disposable one made by Pilot Pens. So that one is using water-soluble ink drawing before and after you start making washes, but the water-soluble ink allows you to then move ink around afterwards. I said not to do too much, and here I am coming back in with one more thing, but I had made a decision that I thought the ink lines would be helpful to come further down the bottle. And I'm actually thinking that I might want to actually achieve a little bit of a dark down here. Just curved lines following the same direction I'd come with my brush earlier, and then just fill in some little bit, some shape. And if I do too much, I can always come back in with my brush and soften or add a little bit of extra, bring it a little further down, but grayer. And then again, if that's going too far, or I think it's too much, I can dry my brush back out and pull some of the gray ink further away. Make it a little less strong. It's still wet. If I blotted it, I would get rid of this, but I'm actually not wanting to get rid of it completely. I just kind of want to modify it. Now I'll blot that little bit. Okay. Do I really need that? Probably not. It was an idea that probably should have been left undone. But there we go. With both of these, we've come in with ink first, started our drawing, and then wet it and pulling the ink lines and ink marks away with water, thinning them out, getting lots of grays of different kinds, different levels of gray, and then coming back in afterward with more ink line, and then coming back in again. You know, we can go back and forth as to which one is the last thing we want to deal with. If I decide later on that this area right here is too dark, which I wanted a dark down there, but I might not want that much. I might come back in and, you know, as I'm sitting here saying it, I'm thinking, well, why don't I just do it, even if it's not the right thing to do, because I don't know what the right thing to do is precisely. I do kind of like that a little better. That's not as strong as the stuff up top, but it still has a strength to it that's pulls a little attention down to the bottom. Since I've got all this attention up here, the strong darks right in here, it's nice to have something as a counterbalance to all this stuff up here. Anyway, that's a design idea as opposed to a ink line versus ink wash. Okay, so let's see. If that's Miriam sending me anything back. Huh? Nope. Okay, so I can ignore my phone the rest of the day. Very good. So that is idea number one. Now, another kind of pen that I talked to you guys about would be having a pen that's capable of permanent ink lines. India ink is permanent once it's actually dried. Some ink might come off the top of the surface of an India ink line drawing if you wet it, but it's not the whole ink getting wet, it's just the residue on the top. But if we want an ink line that's completely permanent, one of the inexpensive ones that we could get is this kind, a Sharpie. There's plenty of others. There's Micron archival ink pens, and it's waterproof and fade proof. Micron, and there's also this one's not a black ink, it's brown pen, but it's Copic, which is another one, COPIC. This one happens to be sepia, which is perfectly good to work with. There's also Pitt pens by, I'm trying to think who they are actually made by. I'll remember it in a minute, but they're made by Faber-Castell, which is it was a very good brand. And then there's even things like a fairly new company called True Red, which is these are all fiber tipped pens that are sealed and have inks that they're saying are permanent. This is a Pentel sign pen, which they also are saying is permanent. We'll test a couple of these out, but I'm going to do a quick drawing with this Sharpie. And one of the things I will show you right away is it's a very fine point. It is similar to what the felt flare pen was. Just drawing the top of the bottle, not being too worried at the moment about its any kind of perfection of line. Now, if you are seeing this, you might notice it's on some of my lines as I come down. I'll start a couple over here. I want you to see if I put a line down, put my pen down, and then say I'm going to make a mark downward. You might spot that it's got a little bit of a dot at the end. And if you look at that, I went slowly, and it's a much thicker line because the ink is spreading out so much. This particular felt is very good at transferring the ink. What it's not as good at is controlling the ink, as some of them are, in terms of letting it come out at a slower pace. There's oftentimes a little dot at the beginning or the end of the mark if you're not careful. We can get sort of that dry brush kind of mark making if we work at it a bit. And we can, of course, achieve some strong darks by building up a lot of marks together. But if you'll notice, all these marks at the top, they've got little dots where I've hit the paper and moved. It's because it comes out so fast. There's nothing wrong with that, but you have to be able to manage that a little bit. I'm going to pick up this Micron pen. It's got actually a slightly larger tip, but you can buy these in all kinds of different sizes. You know, like this one's a 0.5, you can get a 0.3, a 0.7, a 0.0 something, you know, so very fine lines, or much thicker lines. This one will give us some of those same things, little dots occasionally on them. This one's fairly thin. It's also a little bit older, so the ink's not coming out as quickly as it could. But now I'm going to come back with a brush here, full of water. And I'm going to add water. And if you'll notice, there's only a tiny residual of ink moving. I mean, if I was doing this with a water-soluble ink, we would have had ink everywhere. And it's just not moving. There's just the tiniest little bit of ink that's moving off that surface. So this gives us a permanent ink that's kind of nice. So if we want to add wash to this, we have to have a pre-made wash or make a wash that we can bring to the surface. This is actually a mix of all three of those washes I made last week. Put them into a bottle. Now poured them back out into a cup this morning. So here I've got a very different feel that none of my lines are soft. Now that can be a really nice contrast. It can also be something that's some people would find that sad that none of the lines are soft, but others would say, "Oh, I love the contrast that we're able to get," because because the lines are nice and crisp. My brush marks can be very distinct and have a nice difference between them and the ink lines. So we get a strong contrast of quality of mark making and wash making, which is kind of nice. They're both perfectly good ways of working. It's a matter of what you like. And I don't even, people often ask me, well, what color do you like or what technique do you like? And my answer is almost always yes. I like different colors, but I like them for reasons not because of what I like, as much as how effective they are in doing what I want them to do. So I will say this about these non-water soluble inks. I mean, they are wet, watery inks, but they're pigment inks, and they don't behave in exactly the same way. And they really hate getting wet. Drawing into a wet area with one of these pens can be a real problem. They will stop working if they cross, sometimes even in just to a wash. They're just not as happy to be in a wet paper area, which doesn't make them bad. It just simply makes them different. In fact, I'm going to draw right over this wash because there is in fact a stem coming out, and it doesn't want to work properly, and it does play games and starts to skip and get a little funky, if you will. It will or it will run slightly in the wet, but afterwards it's skipping. It's not behaving in the way that I would most likely want a pen to work. It skips and it doesn't work in the normal way. So I'm going to basically be done with that right there. And I'll get a little darker here in this. And then I might come and put a little bit of a wash in one of these. So here, this whole piece right here is done with a wash. Yes, but it's done with a wash. It was created ahead of time and applied to ink lines that are not water soluble, but are permanent. Okay, so a very different approach. Now, can they be mixed? Obviously, well, yes, they certainly can. There's nothing wrong with mixing these two. They are good cousins of each other, and they'll be something that you can easily find a way to work with together. But they are significantly different. So if you have a permanent ink pen of some kind, I think I had you guys getting a Sharpie. Let's try that. Same subject matter. So let me do this. Mary, I'm going to pull yours up and there we go. Okay. So this one was done with the water soluble ink.
Yes,
Okay, very good. Um, so you're using, I'm assuming you were using the flare
yes.
and then pulling the water in and moving the water. What parts of that did you have any surprises as you were seeing this?
Surprises. Uh, no, then I ended up putting on some wash. I used I scribbled with the flare and got some ink going on and used that. But I wanted to do bigger areas, so I used some of my newly mixed washes.
Okay,
So I've got a little bit of this and a little bit of that going on.
excellent. That's exactly the approach that um, if I'm out doing a sketching in the field, I usually don't carry any washes with me. I might have some
Okay.
washes mixed up and then put into a water brush, one of those brushes that's got a handle with filled with water. I'll put ink in that. Sometimes an ink
Yes.
wash. But if I'm working small, then I don't usually need any other washes. But if you're working on a larger sheet of paper, obviously mixing a wash is really, really an advantage because then you can cover a larger area much more quickly. And that's often one of our goals is to be able to put it down quickly without getting too fussy. Because if we have to nibble little bits of ink out, it can get very fussy and kind of looks like we nibbled more than we painted or sketched or drew. It looks like we sort of nibbled our way across the page. So that was a good idea to mix and match the two. Very good. So I'm going to pull that one off, but I think it worked really nicely. Um, so let's bring, hold on, I'm gonna remove the spotlight. There we go. There we go. Let's see what you were able to come up with, Holly, if you can.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit today with my neck is pinched, so
Oh,
I
sorry.
did a little bit. That's okay. But I'm just let me see.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a little bit kind of
Yeah.
similar um to what
Did,
I did last week, really.
Okay, not a problem. So that one was done with the flare, starting with the fluid ink that then you pulled the water in and pulled it around. Uh, very good. So what I'd like us to do for this last, we got basically an hour. Uh, use either or approach of using a permanent ink and then adding some wash, or adding or putting using your water soluble ink and adding water to create more of a wash, or mix the two as you see fit. You can use uh, water soluble inks and non-water soluble inks, add water, add wash, and don't be afraid of the idea of starting a piece if you want with water. So let me pull this one up. Hold on while I do this. Let's see. Okay, guys, are you getting close to having something semi-finished?
Yep.
Well, I obviously did one. I don't know if you guys were watching. I did the same plant that I've been working with today. Work with first. I worked with pen, and I tried. I first was starting with this one, which was the brush pen, um, but it was a little bit on this particular kind of paper. It was bleeding just a little bit much, so I switched to a finer pen, a slightly finer pen, um, which was this one, and was able to work a line that wasn't bleeding all over the place quite so much. That I like the bleeding pen sometimes, but I will tend to use it on a paper that's less absorbent. Uh, and then as I worked through that, I left some places where I knew I'd want to be a little finer line, where I could come in with a very fine pointed pen at the very end. And having done that, then I switched up something that I hadn't talked to you guys about. We've looked at different inks. We've seen that some inks lean a little bit towards a green gray when they are done as a wash. Some of them lean towards a bluish color. I actually picked up some inks that I actually own. These are straight out of the bottle. It's a burnt sienna ink, a walnut ink, made literally from walnut bark. Some people make it from walnut shells. And this one's a sepia ink. And I will say this, burnt sienna is often an orangey ink. Um, it's literally made originally from the dirt of Siena, which is not too far from Florence, Italy. Uh, Now it's made more chemically to approach that same kind of iron oxide color. Sepia is different. Some sepias are reddish, some are more of a more pure brown. When this one is dark, it looks very dark and brown, but when you thin it out, it's a little bit redder. Anyway, I chose to use the walnut ink because it was a little more neutral for the most part. And I came in and I actually did a wash of walnut ink over a lot of the area. Later on, when I was almost done, I decided to come back in and I tried a little bit of the sepia for a few touches of redder ink. And then letting all that dry, I came back in with my pen again and did a few more details in a few places. And then I thought I was done. And then I decided to come back in with a little bit more of the walnut ink, but my brush still had a little bit of the sepia in it as well. So I actually came in and did a little bit more mark making, to sort of give it a little visual balance or a little horizontal to go against all this verticality. And while I was doing that, I decided I would go ahead and come in and do just a few more touches of drawing, extending some of the lines, pushing up a little bit, another pod up here, while I was doing this. So we haven't talked about the idea that there's other colors of inks out there. Not all of them are black. Not all of them are wash out to a gray. Some of them are brown. You can buy commercial inks that are red, yellow, blue, green. I mean, I've got pens loaded with blue ink that are nice, and I've got an assortment of greenish inks over there that I haven't tried out yet that I'll be working with later. So that's what I came up with. And in this case, I was working with ink line first, and then wash, and then came back over with more line, and then came over with some more wash at the end as well, even coming back into the original. So I was back and forth between the approaches. So why don't we start with Holly this time? Holly, did you get something that you feel pretty good about?
Well, I'm going to see if I can change my background because I know that I have it on blur.
Okay.
And it just occurred to me to take that off. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the coolest thing that I love is that this accomplishes shading in a way that I always want to with crosshatch, and I can never quite get it like
Right.
that. So I really doodled a lot because my mind's in a place where I just can't even draw very well.
Well, when your neck hurts, it's kind of hard to do anything. Yes.
Yeah, right.
But good, yeah. But I agree with you about I love the subtlety of shading and the boldness of shading that you're getting by using the ink. It's got
Yeah.
a good contrast. And a lot of times I will shade with ink, and then I won't do any shading with the pen. And then other times, as you can see in mine here, I was doing a little bit of shading with the pen, but mostly I was letting the ink wash do my shading for me. And that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. And I like it when I can either contrast the two or I can blend the two together a little and say, this part I'm going to do mostly ink shading, ink wash shading, and another part I might do mostly ink line shading, and then find some place where they can become a hybrid and they can live together and really punch things up even more. So good choice.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you,
grateful
Molly.
for the chance to learn that. That's been nice.
Yeah, well, that was one of my hope is to sort of, I mean, I could teach all kinds of things, but I think sometimes it's nice to push us into having more opportunities to stretch in other ways at the same time. All right, very good.
Thank
So
you.
I'm going to
Thanks.
remove the spotlight there, and I'm going to add a spotlight for you, Mary, and I will um, pull yours up. So what you got? All right, you pushed darker. Yay, team. I like that. Do you like that?
I do.
Yeah,
I had fun.
Looks
yeah, I
great.
love.
With the negative shapes, the background, I put a little pencil down first to have some sort of point of reference, and then started to make all the reflections in the glass. I
Yeah,
was so and then I used I guess I used my Sharpie to make lines and ended up again with the brush doing the darkest accents with the undiluted ink.
excellent.
It was
That's
so
really
much
working.
fun.
That looks
Yeah,
great.
Thanks.
that's what I love about working with ink, with wash and pen together, is that you've got the best of both worlds, and you can use whichever one of them is appropriate for what you're doing, and you can get both boldness and also subtleness in the same drawing, which is oftentimes hard for us to do if we're using a lot of other tools. I mean, imagine all the time you've drawn with pencil, and most of us don't get to bold with pencil anymore. You know, we were bold when we were young, thinking that it was bold, and then we go, oh snap, why can't I get a dark black, and why can't I get a tone? And there's ways to do that, but ink really allows us to very quickly get both bold and subtle. We can get delicate with small tools or light values, and then we can contrast that with really dark, rich values, or pure white left over with, like you're saying, the negative space inside that bottle, the whites versus the darks, getting a lot of brightness. So good job, guys. I really do appreciate that. You guys really did a good job. You really did, and I appreciate that. Next week we'll be working again. Let me make my iPad a little bit more appropriate. So next week we'll be working some more with ink and pen, both in line, but we'll push ourselves in some other ways. So look for a handout, digital, obviously, a digital handout that will recap what we just did, and then will also give us a little bit of chances for maybe some homework. But it's always optional. Never assume that you have to do it. But even if you don't use it now, there might be good things to use later as you work. So you guys have a good week.
You too.
And don't
Great.
forget, ask questions. If you have a question during the week, send me an email, send me a text. I'll be glad to answer.
Thanks for your
When-
patience.
Oh, no problem, Holly. I was having terrible trouble getting logged in this morning. I did it at 9 just because I knew I was having issues on the computer upstairs.
Sorry to interrupt. My Gmail wouldn't log in, and then I had to verify, and then a device was, of course, dead.
Of
Right.
course.
So yeah, I was like, so I appreciate
yeah.
you guys.
Technology is a great addition to our lives and a horrible thing at the same time.
Yeah, so thank you again. Sorry for the disruption and the lateness. Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, I was just gonna ask one quick question. When you go in the field or in town or whatever to work, the deal with the putting the washes in the brush pen, I thought that was a great idea, but do you carry great big old heavy pad of paper like this, or what do you know?
Ah, okay. I don't use as large a sheet when I'm outside. If I'm going to be doing ink, I'll use a smaller one, sort of more like, I don't dare turn this up to, I might use one that's this big, which
Okay,
is, but that's because when I'm outside, I just don't carry as large as I used to carry 18 by 24 and even 22 by 30 sheets of paper outside. I still will, 18 by 24 really pushes my limit about what I'm willing to carry anymore. Because when I'm outside working, most of the time I'm interested in being, how do I want to say this? I'd rather be a little more incognito,
yes,
slip around and not be noticed, so that I can get more candid situations a little bit if I'm including people or things in a city or out in the countryside. I just don't need to be noticed that much. Doesn't mean that I wouldn't occasionally take a larger sheet out, but if I'm doing ink outside and ink wash, I will I might even carry a light wash in a bottle like this. Probably smaller than this. I might carry one that's like half the size with a light ink wash, because I know with a light ink wash I can put water down, and then I can add ink directly into it. But most of the time I will carry simply pens as opposed to a lot of water with ink in it. But I will carry like this one. I've got two of them here. One with, oh, sorry. One with that's full of a black ink, and but it's an ink wash. And then this one is actually a brown, that walnut ink that you see over there, carried in. And then I always have my brush pen, which is basically a fountain pen that's got a brush on it instead. But that I just purchased. It's a Pentel pocket brush pen. That's what it's called. There's some other brands that I've got. Like I've got a couple other ones over there that I'm gonna try out by other brands. But that's a really good idea to have them if you really like working with brush and you want to work with with a wash outside. A lot of times I'll just simply use the flare or my fountain pen, and flare and fountain pen, and then just add water to create washes. But you're right, that won't cover a large spaces easily. So for larger washes, I'll probably be in the studio.
very good.
Okay, very good, guys. That was a great question, Mary. Thank you. And if you want some more info on that, just send me an email and I'll be glad to give you some more info.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. And I hope you have a
Next
great
week.
week.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye for now.